You inherit money, and within 2 years, it's gone. Not because you're reckless, but because your brain processed that money differently than the person who built it. There's a cognitive pattern that explains why wealth rarely survives 3 generations. It's not about financial literacy. It's about how the brain assigns value to money based on where it came from. Researchers call this mental accounting. Your mind doesn't see money as money. It sees categories. Money you earned through effort lives in one mental file. Money you received without working for it lives in another. And those files have completely different rules. When someone spends years building wealth, their brain associates that money with sacrifice. Every dollar represents time, stress, decisions. The emotional weight is embedded in the value. But when you inherit that same money, your brain never went through those experiences. The sacrifice isn't stored in your neural pathways. To you, it's just numbers in an account. Studies on behavioral economics show that people treat windfall money with what researchers call lower pain of paying. When you spend money you earned, your brain experiences a small psychological cost. You feel the loss. But when you spend money that arrived without effort, that cost signal is weaker. This isn't about being spoiled. It's about how experience shapes perception. The first generation builds wealth while developing an entire cognitive framework around resource scarcity. They learned to delay gratification because they lived through periods where immediate needs threatened future security. The second generation often grows up with stability, but they still witness the work. They absorb some of the underlying psychology even if they don't experience the same pressure. By the third generation, that context is gone. The struggles that created the wealth are stories, not memories. The cognitive framework that protected the money was never built into their decision-making system. And it's not just about spending, it's about risk perception. People who built wealth through their own effort tend to be more conservative with it. They've experienced what it feels like to have less, so their brains are wired to protect what they have. Inherited wealth doesn't come with that break. The person receiving it has never experienced the alternative. Their baseline is abundance. And when your baseline is abundance, your brain calculates risk differently. Data shows that third-generation wealth holders are more likely to make aggressive investment choices, more likely to trust emerging trends. Not because they're foolish, but because their risk threshold was calibrated in a different environment. There's another layer. The first generation builds wealth with a specific goal, often survival or security. Their choices are driven by necessity. The third generation inherits wealth without a corresponding purpose. They have resources, but no narrative about why those resources matter. Psychologists studying motivation talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic goals. When you're building something, the goal is intrinsic. You're solving your own problem. But when you inherit something, the goal becomes extrinsic. Someone else wanted this for you. An extrinsic motivation is weaker, so the money becomes directionless. It sits there waiting for purpose, and in the absence of purpose, it drifts toward consumption. Not extravagant consumption necessarily, but the kind of slow, comfortable spending that doesn't feel significant in the moment but compounds over years. Some families break the pattern, usually by recreating the conditions that built the wealth in the first place. They don't just transfer money, they transfer mindset. Studies on successful multi-generational wealth show that families who maintain it tend to involve younger members in decision-making early, not just as beneficiaries, but as participants. Because the issue isn't the money itself, it's the absence of the psychological architecture that knows how to hold it. This explains why some people who inherit wealth immediately give portions away or place it in structures they can't easily access. They intuitively recognize that they don't have the cognitive framework to manage it responsibly yet. The uncomfortable part is that you can't just transfer knowledge. You can explain compound interest, investment strategy, the importance of saving. But understanding something intellectually doesn't change how your brain values it emotionally. The framework has to be built through experience. For some people, that means intentionally creating friction, not inheriting until they've built something themselves, not accessing the money until they've lived through financial uncertainty. These aren't rules. They're experiments in cognitive alignment, because the pattern isn't inevitable. It's just the default when nothing interrupts it. And once you recognize the pattern, you can start to ask different questions. Not, how do I manage this money? But how do I develop the mental framework that knows how to manage it? If you've inherited resources, or if you're building them to pass on, the question isn't about financial strategy. It's about psychology. What experiences shape how you value things? What would need to change in how you think about time, risk, and effort for the wealth to mean what it meant to the person who built it? Most people never ask that question. They assume money is just money, and that's where the pattern begins.